Welcome to B-Sides Las Vegas's I Am the Cavalry track. A few notes before we begin. First, we would like to thank our sponsors, especially our diamond sponsors, Adobe and Aikido, and our gold sponsors, DropZone AI and Profit. It is their support, along with our other sponsors, donors, and volunteers, that make this event possible. These talks are being streamed live, and as a courtesy to our speakers and the audience, we ask that you check to make sure that your cell phones are set to silent. If you have a question, there will be an audience microphone placed in the aisle thusly. Please use the microphone to ask any questions so that the stream and the recording can hear you.
There's a live stream.
And as a final reminder, the B-Sides Las Vegas photo policy prohibits taking pictures without the explicit permission of everyone in the frame. These talks are being recorded and will be available on YouTube in the future. Our presenters have kindly granted permission to take pictures of them, so you may take pictures of them, but not anyone else.
Only
Thank
good
you very
pictures.
much.
If my eyes are closed, no sharing, please.
All right. Well, this is the final, very high-powered panel of the day. We are super excited to welcome Ms. Stacey Higginbotham and Mr. Silas Cutler and Mr. Paul Roberts to help us understand how to deal with this problem of end-of-life equipment so as to not end our own lives. Over to you.
I feel like our title may be a bit of an overstatement. I hate to start on that, but I'll start with, my name is Stacey Higginbotham. I am a policy fellow at Consumer Reports. Can everyone hear me in the back? Yes. Okay. And I'm going to let each of my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Silas Cutler. I'm a principal security researcher at Census. I also work as an adjunct for the Institute of Security and Technology.
And I am Paul Roberts. My day job is Director of Content at Reversing Labs, which is a malware analysis and software supply chain security firm. And I'm founder of a nonprofit called Secure Resilient Future Foundation, which is focused on promoting smart cyber policies for the future.
It's a very broad goal. I like it.
Yes.
Okay. So why are we here? To scare the pants off of you.
Yeah.
Are you ready? Just to get this started, we're going to talk about this issue from the consumer, enterprise, and OT side, starting with the consumer. But first, what are we talking about? We're talking about the risk of end-of-life devices on networks. And is this even a problem that we should worry about? Yes. On the consumer side, Consumer Reports has done some work on this, but if you don't trust us, the FTC actually in November did a study, and they noticed that of the hundreds of connected smart IoT devices, only 11% actually clearly told consumers what the end-of-life product or policy was. So when those things would go offline, which is crazy. We'll talk about it in a minute.
So additionally, last year at Census, we found 400 exposed human-machine interface devices, HMI devices, which were mentioned briefly on some of the talks before today. Found 400 of them in the US related to water treatment plants that you could visit with a web browser and see the tank levels for water holdings in various communities across the US.
And big problem that we have right now is a population of between 900 and 900 million, 90 million and 100 million SOHO routers deployed in homes and small businesses throughout the country, a significant portion of which contain exploitable vulnerabilities and or have been declared end of support and end of life, meaning they no longer receive security updates and patches from the manufacturer. These are being actively targeted by state actors, including China, as well as cyber criminal groups. And there are immense repercussions from that. We're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so starting right off and continuing with the things to worry about. So a lot has been talked about the sort of threats that are being seen across various sectors right now. And one of the ones that most people are familiar with is Volt Typhoon. I come from a background investigating ransomware actors and targeted intrusion actors, and I've struggled actually for quite a bit with Volt Typhoon specifically. I keep trying to break it into a model similar to what I remember from like ransomware groups, where it's something like, and I try and wrap my head around them as a group because I want to find an office or some unit that is the ones that are day to day conducting these intrusions. But as I've looked more into Volt Typhoon, thank you, and as I've continued to track on things, it's important to think of Volt Typhoon not necessarily like a traditional threat actor in the sense that there might be one unit. It's not going to be something like that. Something like Volt Typhoon and the Salt Typhoon actors that people are talking about these days as well. These go to something actually that we started talking about in the security community back in 2018, 2019 called supra threat actors, in which it's multiple different units all working together towards what essentially amounts to a national effort. And we've talked about this with China as part of the Taiwan Strait conflict. Specifically, the technique, as I've always been told, what they're trying to accomplish is what's called a fire sale. This was part of Stuxnet, or supposed to be, or Nitro Zeus, I think was the parent operation. And the idea is that in the event of a conflict, you want the ability to disrupt transportation, financial utilities, power, all of the critical parts of a country's utility sectors. Volt Typhoon represents fundamentally the targeting of the energy sector and building this long-term capability capable of conducting a disruptive action within a timed window as part of a larger effort. So the challenging thing is we trying to put it in like a shape that we understand often. Folks may be familiar with things like the KV botnet, which Lumen has done some fantastic reporting on. And it's important to remember, like, the KV botnet itself likely is only one part, and it may even be a contractor supporting this broader Volt Typhoon effort. But groups like this are highly sophisticated. They know how to conduct these attacks. The term living off the land to this day bothers me a lot. So we'll dive into a little bit more as we go.
All right, so we've just scared you. Why does EOL matter in a connected world? And we probably instinctively understand this because many of us are probably dealing with connected devices in the cybersecurity community, but connected devices establish this ongoing relationship between a consumer and a manufacturer. You no longer can sell something, throw it out into the world, and pretend that you can leave it alone. You have to continuously update these products and continuously communicate their status. And for a consumer, and by consumer I mean anyone who buys these products, but specifically consumers, the lifetime of a connected product, it no longer ties directly to its physical life, right? So I think of this as a light bulb. A lot of us probably have smart light bulbs. Historically, when your light bulb burnt out, I know this is before, pretend we still have incandescence. The little tungsten thing, it burnt out, literally, and your light bulb would turn off. And you knew it failed and you would replace it. My smart light bulbs don't do that. When they are end of life, I have no idea, right? But then they become part of this larger attack surface. So when you think of the EOL issue, this is about reducing the overall attack surface and capacity for people to use, like to target or hurt the US. All right, nobody likes maintenance, and the industry isn't set up to support it. We have heard this like a million times today. The issue is we're all excited about innovation, we're excited about doing new things, but we're not excited about going back and making sure the existing things we have stay operational and are still getting security updates. I mean, it's basically like changing the air filter in your house, right? How many of us are excited about that? Literally no one. Okay, so I'm sorry. You are on the maintenance team, and bless your heart. So what happens when we ignore the end-of-life issue? At Consumer Reports, we call all of these connected devices in the home, it could be in the enterprise, we call them zombie devices. And I like to tell people that today, zombie devices are running amok. They are everywhere. And we just don't know it. And the other issue is these are supportive devices with unsupportive owners. And what I mean by that is in the enterprise, especially in the consumer home, if you're not doing automatic patching or updates, the owners of these devices, they have to do it. And a lot of them aren't paying attention to it. And underlying this whole issue is the fact that we need herd immunity against malicious actors. So again, reducing the attack surface, getting everybody, if everybody pays attention to their end of life, then we reduce it for everybody and we're all ultimately safer. I know this is a hard sell, but this is the sell we have to do. All right, so in this talk, thank you for coming. We are going to explain the problem of zombie devices on the consumer side. We're going to show how EOL affects us in IT and OT environments. We're going to expose this obscurity by security disinformation that is promoted by vendors. Paul is going to do a great job on that. And we are going to provide practical ideas and policy suggestions that you can advocate for or vote for if they ever come up. And yeah, are we ready?
Yes.
Consumer time. How many of you guys ever do an audit of your smart devices in your home? And I
Wow.
love you. And y'all are security people, right? So I do it in October.
Not representative of the population at large.
Yeah, this is absolutely not.
No.
But every October, because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, I actually go through all of the connected devices in my home and I check to see if they're still supported. I used to run 80-something devices in my home, so this was a long process. Since I've been doing this in the last 2 to 3 years, I think it's year 3 was this year, I only have like 40 devices now in my home. But I do call, and a lot of times, y'all, it is calling because most vendors still don't have this information readily accessible. I have to call or email. And about a third of the companies never get back to me. So this is what consumers are dealing with, and it's no wonder there's all these consumer zombie devices running around. We did a survey in December where we actually asked consumers about this whole issue. Like, how well do they understand that any connected device in their home is a potential zombie? The answer is not well. And then what is their impression? So for 40% of consumers who have purchased a connected device, the only time they figured out that it stopped getting any sort of feature or security updates is it just stopped working for them. That is insane, right? I mean, if you're just relying on something and suddenly it just stops working. But what's worse is only 39% got any sort of notice from their manufacturer. And this is just people who realized it's a zombie, right? There's other people who have no idea, and they're not doing the security audits. So this slide has way too much information for you, but I'm happy to share it. We have it online. But basically what this is trying to show is how consumers don't actually understand that their connected devices will one day die, and they will die because their software stops getting supported. Because I don't know how else I could explain to the 43% of people who think their Amazon Echo or their Google smart speakers will remain working after software updates. They're like, yeah, it's totally gonna work for me. And I know some of you guys are like, they can hook it up via Bluetooth and then they'll still be able to control it and use it offline. Don't. Most consumers aren't doing that. I mean, I want them to, but no. Okay. And this is just a general sense of how long consumers expect certain devices to last. And if you can see here, a lot of people have some kind of crazy expectations. I don't know how many people really think a smart light bulb is going to last 10 years. Actually, I do, because they're right there. I will tell you, though, just in the, let's call out some good actors, Philips Hue light bulbs, I've owned those for 10 years, and they are still getting software support updates. And I can go to the Philips Hue website, and they will actually, if you Google your Philips Hue light bulbs plus end of life, or security updates, they have a nice little chart that shows you exactly what they're supporting and how long. That's the sort of change we want to see in the world. So on the consumer side, what do we want? We want manufacturers to set up what we call minimum supported timeframes on products. That is a clunker of a statement. Think of it as an expiration date, but we can't call it an expiration date because I want to give manufacturers the chance to extend it. So we're calling it the minimum supported timeframe. And basically, when you buy a product, I want you to be able to look on the label and say, these light bulbs will get security updates for 3 years. Awesome. These light bulbs will get 5 years, even better. And I also want the manufacturers to be like, hey, I'm going to extend that, and I'm going to let you know via email or on the website, and it's going to be easy to find on a product page. We also want manufacturers to proactively notify consumers. So that 40% who didn't know their stuff was going to stop working, We want the manufacturers to be like, hey, in 6 months, it's going to stop working. We also want to help consumers understand what to do when this happens. It is very hard to tell a consumer that that $180 Amazon Echo that they bought back in 2015 no longer is getting security updates. But you know what? If you have one of those Pringles can Amazon Echo devices, it's end of life. It is not getting security updates. You should probably unplug it. Just a PSA for y'all. But it's hard for consumers to do that, and I don't blame them. And then we think longevity and support should become a market differentiator. And that disclosure up front is going to drive that. We've actually seen this in the smartphone industry, smartphones. The iPhone used to have like 2 years of support, and Google was like, hey, we'll give you 3. And then Apple was like, oh, okay, fine, we'll give you 3. And now we're up to 7. We're seeing it in the smart TV space. LG and Samsung TVs are both offering 7 years for your smart TV. By the way, that's only 7 years for your TV. I don't know if you think your TV should last that long, but you at least know. Okay, so those are some of the things on the consumer side. Now let's go to Paul and talk about enterprise.
Sure. First of all, let me start by saying that in 1986, my mother redid our kitchen and installed a Sub-Zero 550 refrigerator. And 40 years later, that refrigerator is still operating. So all those people who said, I don't know, maybe like 5 years for my refrigerator, 10 years, try 40 years. But that's obviously not most refrigerators. But it's a way of sort of thinking, like the way we're thinking about these devices and their lifespan has been curtailed by vendors. And it's good to kind of pop out of that sometimes. Think back to when things lasted a lot longer. So my name is Paul Roberts. I'm the president of this nonprofit called Secure Resilient Future Foundation. Again, we're really focused on promoting policies that promote secure, transparent, and resilient future, addressing cybersecurity risks. So yeah, as Stacey said, I'm going to talk about this sort of end-of-life problem as it relates to what we would consider IT, whether it's enterprise, just kind of the technology that businesses and nonprofit organizations, public and private sector organizations rely on. A lot of our economy relies on. And I know at conferences like this and Black Hat and DEF CON, even up here, we have consumer, OT, IT, kind of siloed, right? The way we talk about these problems. But the truth is, of course, as we know, they're all intertwined with each other. And we've had incidents in recent history that have made that really clear. And one, of course, as you would indicate up here, would be the Colonial Pipeline hack back from 2021. That was a compromise of Colonial Pipeline's IT infrastructure, I think through a compromised VPN account, if I recall, by a ransomware group. And to kind of contain that breach, Colonial shut down their entire pipeline system that transfers natural gas and up from Florida up into the Northeast, or actually gas, just not even natural gas, just gas, and huge disruptions, lines at gas stations and so on. Was it a compromise of their OT environment? As far as we understand, no, it was not. But the result was the same, which was a shutdown of this critical infrastructure that provides, fuel to a big chunk of the U.S. population in the Northeast. And that's not the only one. More recently, we've seen attacks on St. Paul, Minnesota, and I believe Abilene, Texas, where ransomware groups compromising public sector infrastructure. As we all know, local governments, state governments, underfunded, understaffed, and not secure. And once again, those organizations shut down critical services used by residents in order to contain and respond to the ransomware risk. So when we talk about IT, OT, consumer technology, yes, they are very different. Different vendors, different architectures, different support ecosystems, written in different languages, communicating in different protocols. Those are all legitimate distinctions between these different technology types. And consumer IT, consumer electronics, IT and OT are often deployed within the same environments and are interlinked. Vulnerabilities in one can lead to compromises of the other, whether that's a direct compromise or an indirect compromise, like with Colonial Pipeline. And of course, as we know, the malicious actors, the Volt Typhoons, really don't care what their mode of access is to your environment, right? They are results oriented. They're focused on the objective they want to obtain. If they're coming in via a smart television set in the kitchen where your employees gather, that's okay. If they're coming in via a router, switch, firewall, public-facing application server, that's fine too. Doesn't really matter. What matters is the objective. And we all have examples of this. There was I think, casino that got hacked via the fish tank. Yep, that was a fun one. We remember Target that got hacked via the HVAC system in a contract. That goes back, 15 years now. So we all understand this, but it's important to keep in mind that these distinctions are kind of, don't really hold much water. And an example of that, of course, is SOHO routers, right? So SOHO, small office, home office routers. There are, as I said, around 100 million of these deployed in the United States. That's based on statistics of about 130 million fixed broadband subscriptions in the US, and around 80% of those households own a broadband router. So that gets us to around 104 million SOHO routers out there in homes, small businesses, you name it. And these are actively targeted by malicious state actors, Volt Typhoon, cyber criminal groups, ransomware groups, and others, Chinese, Iranian, North Korean, Russian, you name it. And why they build botnets out of these devices, we knew that years ago with the Mirai botnet, which targeted IoT devices. And those botnets are used for a variety of purposes. Could be distributing phishing emails and other content that are used to gain access to sensitive accounts that they then use to move laterally. Could be malware distribution, could be for command and control and moving data that you've stolen off of an environment. Password spraying, hard brute force attacks to crack accounts. One of the advantages that these have, and why actors like Volt Typhoon like SOHO routers deployed in residential settings, is because it gives them a really good way, if there are thousands of them or tens of thousands of them, of spreading out malicious activity across a large population of devices. That makes it much harder for the target to spot patterns, and also avoids the types of threat detection. It's going to say, oh, that's traffic that's coming from Russia or from Eastern Europe or China, and so we're just going to block it. Hey, that's traffic that's coming from suburban Boston. This is probably legitimate. So they serve a whole bunch of purposes. So SOHO routers are a great example of kind of this cyber risk problem around smart and connected devices. So I'm just going to ask you all, raise your hand if you've got a broadband SOHO router at your home. Yeah, okay. I think that's an underrepresentation, but okay. And raise your hand if you actually purchase that yourself, deployed and actively manage it. Okay. Raise your hand if it was supplied by your broadband provider and I'll raise my hand too, right? Okay, and now raise your hand today. Sitting here today, you can state with confidence that that broadband router has not been declared end of support or end of life. Pretty good. Self-selecting population, okay? Not reflective of the population in general. But, and I'm going to say, I'm not 100% sure. I logged into my router maybe a couple months ago, but I didn't go and say, oh, what version of firmware is it doing? Is this still supported? Is this device still supported? Do I need to upgrade? Unclear. One other question. So how many of you have actually hardened your SOHO device? So strong password, shut off FTP and Telnet, and that's okay. You guys aren't representative of the population. I'm going to stop polling you. The reality is, of course, these devices are kind of set and forget. For many, of that 104 million, what percentage are set and forget? People have no idea. They haven't been updated in months, years, decades. That's a big proportion of what's out there. As Silas said, there's been a lot of really good research done on botnets by like Lumen and Black Lotus Labs, cyber criminal and state sponsored, that rely heavily on compromises of these devices. So a substantial population of these devices, whether it's millions, tens of millions, are end of life, end of support, meaning they no longer receive software updates and patches, and therefore are vulnerable. So if they're running a vulnerable version of a known that's been identified in firmware, attackers that can identify that router can compromise it using that known vulnerability. So end-of-life SOHO routers are a big target, and this is just a quote from Lumen, kind of explaining why. They're associated with home and small business users. They don't have as Stacey pointed out, consumers generally don't have the time, knowledge, or expertise to actively maintain them in the way that many of you are. And because they're SOHO routers, they're fairly flexible. They can handle a lot of traffic. They're very effective as infrastructure for conducting malicious activities. Case in point, as Silas mentioned, is the KV botnet. This is a botnet that dates back, I think, to 2022. It was kind of first identified, called out by Lumen and Black Lotus in 2023. It's not huge. It's not like it's a huge botnet. I mean, it's hard to know exactly how big, but thousands, tens of thousands of devices, maybe. But highly effective, and it's been used in attacks by Chinese state actors, Volt Typhoon, targeting U.S. critical infrastructure, as well as those in U.S. allied countries, and it's being used to basically target communication systems. I think the idea is in an incident like an invasion of Taiwan. Being able to shut down the ability of the U.S. to communicate and coordinate with its allies in Asia and Taiwan and so on. Seems to be the pattern. And the devices, by and large, that make up this botnet are end-of-life SOHO routers by Cisco, Draytech, Netgear, more recently Axis IP cameras as well. So these are all being targeted. And this is ongoing. So, I mean, this was written about 2 years ago, but this botnet is still out there, still operating. It technically got shut down by the DOJ back in last year. Really what that meant was you had a court warrant. They, according to them, removed the malicious software, the KV botnet software, and cut off access to the command and control environment. Although Silas says that might not actually be what they did.
There's weird legislation around where they're allowed to uninstall, from what I understand.
Right.
They had a notable impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
However, those devices are still out there. They're still end of life and unsupported, right?
And somebody could also just walk back in.
That's right.
And the thing is these environments as well are target rich and actor heavy rich as well. Like,
Yeah.
Mirai is a routine thing where someone will break back in. Somebody else will break in the next week.
That's
kick
right.
off the existing Mirai infection with their own.
Right. They're like abandoned homes, basically. It's just like, who's squatting in it this week? Who's squatting in it next week? One of the things that KV botnet operators did when they compromised these devices was remove other malware. So like a lot of these devices already had malware on them, but the botnet operators were like, no, we need to be the only malware on this thing. But for the DOJ to be like, we shut this down, it's like doing an end zone dance on like the 20-yard line. It's just like, yeah, you took care of this version of these devices being misused, but, mission accomplished, right? The other thing I'd like to point out just before I hand the mic to Silas is that this issue is not of end-of-life devices and end-of-life software is not specific to the consumer space. It's not specific to SOHO routers. And an example of that we've seen more in the traditional IT space is with the Ivanti VPN appliances. These are really widely used virtual and physical VPN appliances for obviously a virtual private network, remote connection into sensitive networks. By their very nature, they are public facing, right? Because they're giving other people access into your environment. And these have been the target of a string of attacks going back 3 years, targeting serial, remotely exploitable zero-day vulnerabilities in the Avanti firmware. Volt Typhoon is generally, these attacks are generally attributed to them. There have been numerous reports written. There was 1 month where 5 separate O-days exploited in a single month. And the targets were Department of Energy, EPA, Transportation Security Administration, the UK's National Cybersecurity Center, New Zealand, Five Eyes targets. So these are highly targeted state-sponsored attacks. What's really interesting is that Eclipsium, and after this sort of string of attack after attack after attack, this firm Eclipsium that does embedded device security decided to really take a look at what's going on with this Avanti firmware, the stuff that's running these devices. And Avanti actually is one of the few vendors out there that actually encrypts our firmware images. So it's not as easy to sort of reverse engineer them, figure out what's in that firmware. They do that ostensibly to secure them. But what Eclipsium found really makes you wonder if that was the actual purpose of encrypting those binaries. Because what they found was end-of-life code. The base operating system for the Avanti devices was CentOS version 6.4. That was originally released in 2013. It was declared end-of-life in 2020. And this analysis was happening in 2024. So these devices out there deployed in 3-letter agencies, sensitive government agencies, are running a end-of-life, unsupported, open source operating system. They're also running an end-of-life version of the Linux kernel, 2.6.32. That had been declared end-of-life in 2016, so 8 years before the analysis happened. And they were running a version of OpenSSL that dated to 2017. So again, these were software that had been updated, patched, secured, but those, like with OpenSSL or with Linux kernel, there were more recent, more secure versions of it. Those had not been adopted by the vendor. Also, and this is something I see through my work at Reversing Labs and the work we do with supply chain security, very vulnerable code. So Eclipsium found numerous outdated libraries, open source and third party, 396 CVEs or software vulnerabilities that had a rating of high, and 111 of those, around a third of those, had known exploits, and 2 of them had remote exploits. So this kind of speaks to the larger question. So end-of-life software, how long vendors are going to support software, is one aspect of a larger problem, which is around software integrity, software supply chain security, and so on. Without clear guidelines around support and maintenance, as well as transparency about what's in software and the quality of that software. Huh? SBOMs, that's right, software bills of material. Consumers, businesses, critical infrastructure are at a huge disadvantage. So my take on this is the emperor has no clothes, emperor OEM. And this kind of comes out of the work I've done with the right to repair movement. So I testified in front of Congress back in 2023. I've gone to a lot of hearings and advocated on for a right to repair. And yes, the message, the sort of, I would call it disinformation from the software industry, including including vendors who sell cybersecurity, is that, and this is what they would say in hearings, like, the security of our products and the security of our customer data is our top priority. There is nothing we take more seriously than that. And any regulations you pass are really gonna, hinder our ability to innovate and protect our customers. And then there's this sort of, there is security and obscurity line of argument. Let us build a walled garden that will be a beautiful, pure, uncorrupted place where we will protect our customers data and environments from compromise. Walled gardens are beautiful and safe. What that means practically is monopolies on service, maintenance, and upkeep, latitude to kill products whenever you deem them no longer profitable, and really limiting the ability of customers to actively maintain, repair, and sustain the products and technology that they bought. So there is this kind of idea that third parties, independent repair operators or the customers themselves can't be trusted to patch, maintain, update their own stuff. You have to have our authorized people come in and do it. And that end of life is a purely vendor-based decision. It's our decision when to end of life or end of support products. It's based on our own calculations. And there are no, that you're going to bear the burden of that, but it's our decision, uncorrupted, uninfluenced by anything else. So this is a major phenomena in the industry, software industry, and there are a lot of cybersecurity consequences to it. What are the solutions? So Stacey had her ideas. I think there are a lot of, one of the things that we proposed is model legislation around, okay, we're not there, okay. Some of the things that we can do is mandate vendor transparency. So Josh mentioned software bills of materials, absolutely. What's the ingredients list for your software? Are you using a 10-year-old end-of-life operating system? If so, that might influence my decision to buy your product, renew our subscription, what have you. What is the support lifecycle for this product? Like Stacey said, if consumers know how long you're planning to provide security updates and so on, that might influence their decision and might create positive market forces to do more support rather than less. One idea might be mandating patching for high-end critical vulnerabilities, even for end-of-life products. And when you think about it, that would really, for customers, address probably 90% of the issues with end-of-life declarations, right? It's like as long as you're getting security updates, but you're not getting any more feature updates, that's probably okay for most vendors, right? And it would have a huge impact on just the security of the larger population. And then some kind of graceful handoff around end of life of end of support. It can no longer be like, we've just declared end of life, we're turning our back and walking away, and the burden falls on you to either replace the device or just take the chance of getting hacked. Some kind of graceful handoff where you say, we're declaring it end of life, but we're going to open source the software, or we're going to put the software into escrow and let third parties come in and maintain it, patch it, and so on. Okay. And with that, so those are all ideas to discuss, and we can talk about them more. I'm going to pass the baton to Silas, talk about OT security.
Thank you. So I will fully admit, I'm a fairly new person when it comes to entering the OT world. I've started doing a lot more of OT work as part of my role at Census and trying to understand what we see on the internet. And one of the things that has historically been told to me by every person I've ever talked to in the ICS world or in the OT world is that OT systems function differently. They are designed differently. They have different priorities, which in fairness, there are some very critical ones, but there are a lot of overlaps between our worlds. One of the kind of things I've heard from both of you actually has been how critically important it is for folks to be paying attention, to be aware of their devices. And the thing I heard when talking to a lot of folks going into this talk was, yeah, end of life is commonly found in OT networks, but it's justifiably that way. It's infrastructure that they have a plan around, that they know about. And so I'm actually here to say that there's a lot we can actually learn from the OT space in how to bring better practices and better planning around end of life in terms across both enterprise and consumer as well. As I said, there's a very different focus for OT environments. The focus is often on availability. You're expected to maintain these systems not just for the 20 year, 40 years, I think you said for
40 years, 39 years.
That's incredible. Wow.
That's unusual.
Yes.
I wish I'd gotten 4 years out of my last refrigerator. Oh my gosh. But it's like those devices are designed for a short lifespan. The sooner they replace it, the better. Whereas if you're, think about like a traffic light system through a town. That's an OT environment, those traffic lights and the interconnection of all of those. That is not designed for 4 years. If every town had to come in and replace their traffic lights every 4 years, it would be a disaster. So end of life is very common to find, but it's justifiably so. Next slide. So there's a couple things we can take away from the OT world that apply directly to enterprise and consumer. So let's talk about what some of the healthy practices look like. Everyone here has also talked about the advantages of of open standards, where if your smart light bulb communicates through the Philips app, but there's an alternative app that you can use.
Zigbee.
Yes, love Zigbee stuff. And Meshtastic, I think, is built on Zigbee as well. So there's other implementations where these open standards allow for a lot of really cool innovation as well.
We won't talk about Zigbee profiles, but yes.
Yeah, that's fair. So one of the common things as well that I found is when folks in the OT side of the world are looking to maintain infrastructure long term, is they have plans around how to deal with obsolescence of devices over time. So if they know that they're going to be putting the system in, they're expected to run it for the next 40 years, and that's when there will be a refresh. Along the way, they're going to have to replace parts, and they're going to need a longer term relationship with their vendors to ensure that they not just know when this device is going to be end of life, but also when support is going to end, when part availability is going to end. And something as well that I really wish was, like, there was a better way to measure this, but it would be sort of the like end of attention. Like when do folks stop looking at it? And interestingly, from the stat from earlier when I talked about the 400 HMI devices, one of my favorite things so far with engaging more with OT users and vendors, they are much, much more responsive. So of those 400 that we were able to identify, I think we had like I'm going to estimate low because I can't remember the exact number right now, but it was either like 91 or 93% remediation. It was incredible. When I've done malware cleanups in the past, if we have 1,000 victims and we clean up 20, that's a great number.
Wow.
Just because going individually to each vendor is incredibly difficult, and we wouldn't have been able to do it for this cleanup without the support of EPA and others as well. Additionally, in the OT environment, there's other things that help, I guess, maintain the attention of operators longer. So for some different utilities, there are various regulations that they're going to have to adhere to, such as the NERC CIP standards, NERC, so North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Additionally, there's IEC 62402, which documents how an end-of-life obsolescence plan should be laid out and some of the key things that are going to be in that. Yeah. Yes. My slides don't advance at the same time. That always trips me up. So I wanted to kind of close on one other thing with OT. And unfortunately, this slide has been a fun bit for me. So as I've followed a lot of the OT threats over the years, beyond just the work I'm doing now, I did research on one of the precursor variants to Stuxnet. I was heavily involved in a lot of the research around Sandworm when they were going after controllers in Ukraine. A lot of the times, the threats that we see day to day to a lot of OT environments aren't necessarily the sort of CVE, like remote exploits that you typically would think of. Unfortunately, that statement was turned on its head recently with a vulnerability that came out in how train coupling protocols work, and such a cool vulnerability. But often, vulnerabilities that I'm seeing regularly for OT environments typically fall into two categories. Either it's vulnerable by design, which would be such as like HMIs that you connect to the internet, you have full administrative control, there's no passwords. That's poor design standards. Alternatively, things like misconfigurations. Maybe a device wasn't meant to be connected to the internet, but somebody decided it would be great to access it while on vacation. But more often tends to be the vulnerable through supporting tools. So groups like the Iranian one mentioned in the previous talk, Cyber Avengers, they've been prolific in targeting Open Remote Desktop, Open VNC, and even if you go on Shodan, they have a site where you can view live captures from VNC and RDP screenshots that they see, and you'll see things occasionally. Most of them will be log into your Windows 2010 server, but there'll still be quite a few that will have a SCADA-like interface up on it, and those are key examples of vulnerable through implementation or supporting tools. And it's very rare that we find adversary tools that are truly designed to operate against OT systems or things that would speak OT protocols like Modbus and things like that. These are rare. So when we see them, usually they're incredibly fun to look at as well. So.
All right, so we promised you solutions. We, these are not, it's security. We're gonna get like part of the way there, y'all. And before I start with solutions, I wanna caution folks because on the consumer side, I hear a lot of this. They're like, just shut off the devices. When it's end of life, kill it. You cannot do that in consumer homes. You cannot do it for so many reasons. One, there's a lot of really old people who spend a lot of money on this device and maybe they rely on it for something important like, I don't know, detecting fires in their homes. And many of these devices, they still will do that even if they're vulnerable or being used by malicious actors. So you can't shut those off. It sucks. That would be the best, like easy, well, it wouldn't be the best. It would be the easiest. It would be terrible from an e-waste, from a consumer rights. We're very against it. So just, that is not an option if you think it might be. Don't do it.
Bad for the planet as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone hates that.
Yeah.
Except that it's easy. So we do see people suggest it.
Yeah.
What we have suggested, and that Paul foreshadowed for you, is Paul's organization, Consumer Reports, CDT, and PERG. We actually are putting forth model legislation at the state level. It could go federal, but that's going to not really happen. Advocating for a lot of the policies we talked about. So disclosure of how long something will be supported, proactive notification. We even have a line in there about your ISP equipment, those routers and set-top boxes. Set-top boxes are incredibly powerful. They're not managed well, and they are end of life in a lot of ways, or not a lot of ways. They're just end of life, and they're used in a lot of ways in attacks. So it requires your ISPs to maintain this. And I'm not talking about Comcast. They're actually pretty good about it. I'm talking about like the WISP in Iowa who's like, oh, end of what? Okay. There's another thing on the consumer front, the US Cyber Trust Mark, which you guys may have heard about. It might be coming. I hope it's coming. It's probably not going to be coming when we anticipate it. I'm part of the organization that's setting those standards, or the committee that's setting those standards. It's really great. That will have a minimum supported time frame on the label behind a QR code. So theoretically, in the future, if you buy a connected device that has the US Cyber Trust Mark, you could scan a code and you can be like, oh my God, it's supported for 5 years. It is still up in the air whether or not the FCC will say, hey, if you support it for 0 years, that's sufficient to get the mark. If that's the case, pay attention to me because I will totally rail against it and you could all submit comments. Please do. Okay. And then we could provide incentives for organizations to build non-cloud dependent devices to combat e-waste. I'm just going to, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to pitch Consumer Reports just a little bit more. We're actually going to put out research about longevity by design. So it's like security by design. It's going to tackle a lot of these things for connected consumer devices, and it covers cloud, legal models, but it's very exciting. Anyway, look for that. And those are our policy solutions. And here's some practical solutions. Oh, I have one more. Hey, Oasis, which does enterprise software.
Not the group.
Not Liam. Oh. Not the Gallaghers. No. I was trying to make a firewall joke. I was like, it's not going to work. Don't do it. They have proposed standardizing language around end of life. And this is really important because some people call it end of support. But what the heck does that mean? Like, I'm only going to support it for 6 months? I don't know. So we can't have that level of confusion at the consumer level, especially because they're very unsophisticated. But even at the enterprise level, it is confusing when you're like, the end of life, end of support, end of service, end of maybe I'll provide security updates if I feel like it. It's terrible. All right. And then.
Oh, yeah, this was my one. So one of the things that like regularly folks have talked about is, actually it was talked about in the last talk as well, where cyber incidents are treated as like weather phenomenon, where it's an outage that can't be avoided. So one of the things for organizations which can, devise a path for offline operation. If there is the likelihood, and knowing that ransomware attacks do have the ability to disrupt businesses, practice it. Have a plan in place for if you were to have a situation in which your internet connectivity went offline, could you maintain operations still? And this goes into things like, I love the crash card idea for hospitals because that's such a cool idea. And especially if it could be done in a situation when communications are broken, but care still needs to be delivered.
Okay, yes, end of life plan, routinely audit, practice your fire drills, and finally, avoid hardware on the US sanctions list, or the covered list, as they call it. And maybe if something is talked about being on the covered list but hasn't quite made it, because it's quite the process, maybe reconsider sticking that in like a really important place.
I mean, and even in some cases, we may not know what's coming on the sanctions list, but like when you hear politicians talk about TP-Link routers all the time, like maybe consider that when making purchasing decisions.
I will say that yes. Okay.
And also start looking at things like, can this device that I'm buying run software other than the vendor's software, right? It's a really, especially with something like a Soho router, really important question. I can tell you, for an example, and this is based on a little bit of work I did with Reversing Labs, that even if you look at OpenVPN and the free version of OpenVPN versus the premium version of OpenVPN and analyze the security aspects of those two versions of basically the same software, but one's premium, one's free, you'd be really interested to find which one's actually more secure.
All right, so hit up the mics. It's time for questions.
Yeah.
We're going to zoom through it.
Okay, quick hits. The end of life that could lead to end of life. Sometimes you have an OT, ICS piece of equipment from like a Schneider Electric. I'm saying that because they're one of the ones putting an effort in on their newer models. But the owner and operator continues to use a long dead, unsupported end of life, much less secure by design or default. So there's could you try to describe the shared responsibility between putting out defensible, maintainable, higher quality things and availing yourselves of them? And is there some way in the context of this Volt Typhoon ticking clock to maybe have a program to drain the swamp or cache for clunkers or something like that? And then the second point, if you can weave it in, we started making a list of bad edge devices or dangerous edge devices like TP-Link or those with frequent known exploited vulnerabilities. We had a harder time finding a list of, if there's a naughty list, what's the nice list? So is anyone like Consumer Reports or Census like looking at the least bad options? Because if we tell people stop using something, we should probably hint it to them for the current available pool, not the future available pool, of what to use instead. Thanks.
It's like the UL model, right?
So Consumer Reports does have, okay, this isn't exactly end of life, but we're building up a cache of research. What I have looked at recently is the top 75 smart home brands. I have actually looked and researched whether or not they have a dedicated security contact. Actually, most of them do. And the few who didn't the year before when we started it have actually added one. So that's one. And whether or not they have a VDP, a vulnerability disclosure program. So not end of life, but still an indication that they are secure and are developing mature cybersecurity policies. I don't know what else you asked. Oh, that's back to that herd mentality. I don't know how to communicate that to people, so I'm going to pass on that.
I mean, the notification work we do is small, and we're not going to reach everyone. So part of it is recommending better products as well, as you said.
There actually is interest in Washington. It's the FCC manages a program for getting Huawei gear out of small WISPs and ISPs. We've actually talked about it in the healthcare space because there's lots of hospitals running ancient stuff that should not be running. It is an easy thing to get people excited about because they're like, yeah, this is really important. It is very hard to get that funded. I don't know how we do it. That's why I think the resiliency and the practice kind of elements come into play here because.
I mean, one of the things we're missing here is a federal government that actually takes, and I mean, we have in the last 40 years, as all of this infrastructure has grown up, has been a period that in the history of this country is going to be remembered as one of intense deregulation and high degree of skepticism about the role of government in everything. The example you mentioned about managing risks. I mean, you can easily imagine, looking across the country at the critical infrastructure, the providers, and saying, let's let's figure out what are the key providers and assets and resources, and really direct a lot of resources towards securing those and understanding how attacks may play out. Is that going to extend to every suburban home and Soho router? Absolutely not. But if the focus is on coordinating that response and preventing huge disruptions, that's very doable. But we're living in a system where, the lobbyists descend on DC, the emphasis to get that done dies. That's okay, and nothing happens, and we all kind of bear the results of that. Hospitals going down, St. Paul, Minnesota getting hacked, you name it. So, I mean, I do think we need to really reframe our thinking about what a solution looks like. Yeah.
30-second question, 30-second answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked about life cycle time frames for manufacturers that will actually come with EU Cyber Resilience Act, where the vendor must specify for how long they will support, and that will likely spill into the US, and so it will go in the direction of the US cyber trust. Is that correct?
Yes, it actually takes 80% of 303645, the European. It's great. Actually, if you are a consumer buying connected products, any product certified with the CE mark for the EU, after August 1st. As of today, anything coming out after whenever, that's going to be really good. It will have really decent cybersecurity. Next question.
Yes.
Hi, so to make a pitch for the manufacturers without any clothes, I'm at Siemens Energy. We're highly economically incented for customers to buy new control systems. And we have a several thousand person sales force whose only job is to sell new control systems. And yet, when you look at the fraction of customers that buy a new control system for $1 billion power plant that decide not to buy the updates for that control system,
Yes. Right.
it's well over half.
That's right. Right.
So, I see you smart people up there in the policy space saying, oh, the manufacturers need to do stuff.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
What more do you want us to do?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and the policies will not necessarily all be focused towards the manufacturers or the vendors. They will also, right, the point is to set up guardrails, and so, right. So maybe they have the right to not do that, but that creates more liability for them if some adverse incident happens, and that changes their calculations about whether to invest in that update, right?
So I will say, I had 2 slides just on Siemens as defining several different things, because end-of-life procedures, first published thing I could find. Like, they're easy to find, easily available.
And profitable, but most customers say
Final shot.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much gotten there, but enforcing economic incentives on people. So you're talking about requiring them to, there we go, a little higher, requiring them to patch for a certain amount of time. Where do we get the teeth? You're saying the government, we've got deregulation, right? Are these going to do any good if there's no way to go and hold them accountable?
I'm inspired by I'm a member I'm on the board of the Repair Coalition, and I've spent the last 5 or 6 years deeply involved in the right for repair movement. So that had a bunch of very thinly funded nonprofits going up against trillion-dollar corporations like Apple, Microsoft, Google, Samsung, and we won. We've got 6 states that have passed comprehensive electronics right to repair. Some of them ban parts pairing. And so on. And so that's my model. And so, yeah, I'd say DC is a tough environment right now, but the states are actually, and in fact, Texas just passed a pretty decent electronics right to repair bill. This is a bipartisan issue, has bipartisan support, really speaks to the needs of small businesses and consumers. And so I feel a lot more optimistic about that. And I do feel like these are issues that state legislatures might be willing to take up.
And all of them depend on the attorneys general. So the next stage is actually enforcement.
In enforcement, yes, right.
And that's where, once these get passed, help them get passed, and then start tracking who the heck isn't doing it. And then CR will do the job of organizing and taking
That's right.
things to the AG's office.
Yeah.
And now we're stopping. Now, I love you. I'm sorry.
All right. Join me in
STFU.
giving a hand for our fabulous presenters.